I'm Scott L. Miller. It's the 2nd of June, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in León, Nicaragua. It's a beautiful, fresh day here. We've had the rains. Everything is fantastic. It is bright and sunny today. We got just a tiny bit of cloud cover. You can see the fountain is turned off because of the clouds, but as soon as the sun comes back, that's going to be going again because it's solar powered. And today we're going to be talking again about air quality here in Nicaragua. And the reason we're going to talk about it is twofold. One, we did have a recent episode where we addressed that there's a lot of smoke that gets created here in the country, and that comes partially from the trash issues, and that's something that is a concern for people. But we also want to then look at the overall air quality, because there's been some concern that maybe the air quality here isn't that good. There goes the fountain. And is especially well timed, because I just found out from my father, who lives in beautiful rural Western New York, which should be absolutely amazing air, that it is covered in smoke, and the entire region is covered in smoke, and their air quality is very bad, and they're under a health advisory. So it's a perfect time to actually sit down and talk about real world numbers and compare, because you can't always tell by looking exactly how good the air is. I can tell you, it smells pretty good out here, but let's dig into some real numbers and talk about it today. We're going to be back right after the bump, but we're going to head into the office because I want to have my computer in front of me. We're here in the office now, and we're able to look at the stuff on the computer. So let's get to some of these numbers. So a couple things we need to talk about before we really get into looking at numbers of air quality here in Nicaragua. First of all, Nicaragua is a country, so we can't just say what's the air quality in Nicaragua. Let's ask it in the opposite. What's the air quality in the United States or Canada? You'd say, well, that's crazy. Those are giant places. They have air quality great in some places and terrible in others. Los Angeles is always kind of bad, and rural Nebraska is always kind of good. And right now, the West Coast is pretty good, and the East Coast is on fire, and it's absolutely terrible. So, time and location and all kinds of things are factors. So taking a big, sweeping look at any country, it's very difficult because they're big places and they change over time. So there's just a lot of dynamics. When, however, so this is really timely, right? This is a perfect time to have this video because Nicaragua is in its normal, like there's nothing going on. We're just getting normal weather conditions and normal air quality conditions, and there's just nothing special. The United States, however, where I'm from in the Northeast, the entire Northeast US, so roughly half the population of the country, right, is under air advisory. Now, in the US, there are thousands of sensors, so getting data from across the country is very easy. You can compare different areas. In Nicaragua, there are very few. Some places like Air IQ have basically no data about Nicaragua, and so kind of give an overview, but leave us without any real information. So I'm using Accuweather. So what we found is that the United States is pretty much across the board in any place large enough to register for a sensor, meaning places with cities, the air quality is actually generally pretty decent, but not as good as Nicaragua. Really close. But this is important because we have an impression, especially from the video we just did, why is the air in Nicaragua not perfect, right? Because there's a lot of burning of trash and stuff, and it does put particulates into the air. There are times of the year where we have dust storms, but it is dirt particulates and not pollutants. What's going on in the United States right now is huge forest fires, not even in their own country, but from Canada, that are sweeping through the country. But it is common for heavily populated areas of California to have wildfires and tons of air pollution problems. And of course, even though it's only the Northeast United States having the issues right now with dramatically bad air, it is something around 50% of the population of the country is in that zone. So when we're looking, and this is all happening in Canada as well, all these things also apply to Canada, not as many sensors as the US, they're having the same fires, they're having the same air pollutant problems. Now, of course, that's all going on right now. So we happen to start looking at this issue right at a moment days before a huge air quality disaster befell the United States. And of course, if there's a volcanic eruption in Nicaragua or some wild jungle fire, we would have issues as well. So it's not exactly fair. However, none of those things have affected Nicaragua in its known history, yet in the United States, it is a seasonal problem that comes up all the time. It is a continuous news item about how California is becoming uninhabitable, how insurance companies are no longer willing to insure new home buyers in California because it's all so terrible. The number of fires, the number of disasters, things that end up affecting air quality. And right now, the entire Northeast is under advisory. Things that never happen in Nicaragua, levels of air quality issues that never occur here, and of course, industrial waste and industrial air pollutants that we don't tend to get here. So it's a really prescient topic and a really good time to point out that when we talk about when things are really good in the United States, they tend to be on par with Nicaragua for air quality. When things are bad in the United States, they tend to be extremely bad. And when they're bad in Nicaragua, they're still about as good as the United States is when it's bad. Now, of course, there are isolated sensors in any country. You could go find a place in the United States that's always bad. You could go find a place that's always good. And the same thing here in Nicaragua. There's places on the beach like Pochomil where they have great air quality all the time, rivaling anyone in the region, and other places near the volcanoes where it's always bad. So if you are someone who is subject to air quality as a concern, like maybe you have asthma or something, you may want to consider where you want to live and avoid being down air from a volcano, for example. Or, as you already know, being in a large city is going to increase your pollutants versus being in a suburb or the country. Simple things like living more in the country anywhere in the world is going to increase your air quality under normal conditions. Just being around cities, being around cars. And that's one of the reasons that we also need to look at why is Nicaragua so much better. So Nicaragua has a much lower population density than most of the United States. The average person in Nicaragua lives in a more rural zone than the average American. The U.S. has large swaths of open space in which no one lives. This is misleading. Nicaragua does too. Nicaragua's jungle, however, is the lungs of the region. So we're actually an air cleaning zone. We're a primary cleaning zone. We have some of the best air simply because we have so much jungle. Honduras has a lot of manufacturing that we do not have, and so even though they have nearly as much jungle, it is not able to do as much good for them because they have so much manufacturing. Here we have extremely little manufacturing. There's very little going into the air outside of people burning trash, and the majority of people burning trash are burning leaves, which is still not good, but it is not as bad as it seems. Here we're burning leaves. In other countries with higher population densities, they're still burning wood and other things that come from dead plant matter and producing roughly the same pollutants, but with many more people and doing it where people are. Here, you're going to drive through barbecue smoke all the time. People smoking their meats for dinner. Yes, that's going to happen, but we don't normally look at that and say, ooh, that's bad air quality, because you just pass through it and move on. Right? Hold your breath for 2 seconds, and that's it. People cooking are not generally considered the things that we're worried about, and yet that's the things we seem to be worried about here. We're looking. Typically, when people are concerned about the air quality here in Nicaragua, they're looking at it from a completely different perspective, right? Small individuals having fires that are just, this big around, burning mostly leaves, some paper. Yes, sometimes plastic gets in there and that's a problem, but all that stuff's being burned in the United States as well. Just we're not looking at it the same. We're not being burned on the street in front of us. It's big factories that are burning those things in industrial scales, but isolated in a single spot, but it goes into our air. And those forest fires are a big deal. Here, people tend to be pretty rural, so the amount of open air, the distance from other people, the ability to get to fresh air is extremely good, and these things mean that, for the most part, our air quality here is good. We're not the best. No one's claiming that we're the best, but we're pretty decent. If air quality is something you're concerned about, that would drive you to Nicaragua, not from Nicaragua. And it's dangerous because people tend to look and say, well, but it has these issues. Okay, but look at other places you consider good. Do they also have those issues? Yes, but they probably have them more. It's just that we don't look at places that we've come from normally because we assume it's pretty good. Well, I grew up there, it's never been a problem. I don't want to go to somewhere that's worse. Logical, makes sense, right? But we forget we need to check where we're coming from to see how bad it is. And in the case of many people coming from North America, it's dramatically worse. Nicaragua is going to be a great step towards fresh air. And that really should be pretty obvious. You're moving to a lower populated, non-industrial country with tons of jungle and open space. And when we do have fields, yeah, they're mostly just fields. And a lot of times they're being tilled by horses and oxen, not big industrial equipment. We do have industrial equipment, but we also have a lot of manual labor that other places do not. All these things contribute to air quality, and it is only the burning of trash that is a negative to it, and not as much of a negative as it seems. Like I said, trash gets burned in the United States as well. For those who don't believe me, I worked for a quarter of a century in medical waste disposal, and I know we're still sending stuff to the fires. That's just, now they do a good job with it, right? They're not just letting it all go up in smoke. There is collection of that waste, but things are still being burned in the United States all the time. Very normal. There is also, in the United States, a much higher density of cars, automobiles per person, and those vehicles tend to be much larger, right? The average person has multiple cars and large ones. Here, the average person has very small cars. In the United States, the average person drives long distances and so puts a lot of miles on those engines. Here, the same people tend to go very small distances in tiny cars. The comparison is dramatic. The number of gallons of gas consumed per capita in the United States is massive compared to what is consumed in Nicaragua, and all of that has to turn into pollutants. And so that's a big contributor to air quality problems in the United States and not a major contributor here in Nicaragua. We're also right on the ocean. We have a lot of wind whipping across the country. So even if we have any air quality issues here, it tends to get swept away. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be responsible for pollutants. It's not to excuse any bad behavior that may happen in the country. It is simply to point out that in the United States or any large body of inland area, you have the potential for less than ideal air quality to sit and get stuck. Pollutants can collect there. We have this problem in the valleys in France. They're not producing bad air. They're really, really clean regions, but bad air from other places, pollutants, collects and settles in the valley areas, causing problems simply because they're a bit more inland. Nicaragua has very little of that. Almost anywhere you go is open air, and if there's going to be pollutants, they're going to be swept away. The jungle does a lot to clean. The Caribbean air moving over does a lot to shift things over, and we don't have a lot of obstacles in the way. We do have mountains through the middle of the country, but we also have a lot of lakes, so the wind tends to keep moving pretty well throughout the country. So just things to consider that, and in real life, right, we don't have a lot of people with respiratory issues here in Nicaragua. That's not super common. People who have asthma other places tend to come here and discover that their asthma is much better or goes away because they're no longer exposed to the pollutants and particulates that they're used to in other climates. So overall, I think keeping it in perspective, because I really wanted to cover this because of these two issues, because we did a video addressing why it's not even cleaner than it is, and I don't want to give the impression that it is in any way bad. This is a country with really good air in general. I do have to preface that. Living here outside of the city, we do have days where they are burning fields or there is burning trash nearby, and we will get smoke for some small amounts of time. Probably more than I would normally have said than I would get in the United States. However, right now, I've seen the pictures from where I grew up, and they've had more smoke in the last 48 hours than I've ever seen accumulated in Nicaragua. It would take a lifetime of burning trash in Nicaragua to match what they've had this week in my very clean, pollutant-free, small rural community where I grew up in Western New York. So we have to really keep things in perspective. The things that happen in North America tend to produce bad air on scales that are not really comparable down here. And as with many things, people in Central America tend to complain about things that North Americans would never consider complaining about because things are often so much worse. When we're here in Nicaragua complaining about crime, it's a level of crime we'd be rejoicing if we reduced to that level in the United States. When we talk about a day that is smoky and polluted, here it would just be a normal clean day in the United States. Because people are not crossing back and forth that much, we don't often get that much perspective to understand that, oh, this is an area where we're improving so much. And likewise, you could flip that around and say, if you go into Managua, people here will rejoice at the incredible variety of restaurants. But that variety of restaurants is only as good as any random small town in the United States. That's just something that's very different, right? Each one has their strengths and their weaknesses. Air quality, it turns out, is a strength of Nicaragua, and just something you need to keep in mind. If you're looking for healthy living, Nicaragua does really well. We essentially have very few chemicals in our food supply. We have very little processed food in our supply. We have a lot of our fruits and vegetables are produced locally. There's very little shipping that goes into the majority of them. We do not have genetically modified food on any real scale. Not that it's completely banned, but we don't see it like other countries do. There's just a lot of food and air and water quality issues that we have solved. Now, that said, water quality is not the best. It's not bad. You can drink water almost anywhere in the country. I didn't want to go into water supply today, but I'll touch on it really quickly. You can basically drink the water anywhere in the country. It is almost always safe. There are a few places that we tend to avoid it because of old pipes, and that's a real problem. We need to update some pipes, and we don't always know where that is, so it's more of a precautionary thing, but it is, I'm told, a real thing to be concerned about. Have your water tested if you're planning to drink from the tap. But what everyone does is use purified water or spring water that is delivered. It's really simple to deal with, and for the most part, that's what we do. But no one has to worry about brushing your teeth or cooking or anything like that because the water is clean and safe all over the country. So these aren't real things that people need to be concerned about, but when you're coming to another country, we have a tendency to say, well, I've heard that other countries have issues with water or with air or with whatever, and then we look into them and say, well, is there some hint of something that would be a concern? Oh, people drink bottled water. Yeah, they do in the US too. I don't know if you've noticed, people switched. But the water in the US is really clean. Not Flint, not Mississippi, but in general, it's really clean. If you took the average, it's one of the best in the world. America's actually world famous for how good its water supply is, right? They're fantastic. Being that good makes it misleading. Well, if I go to other countries, is their water as good? No one's as good. Like Iceland, yeah, but not generally anybody, right? So looking for it to be as good as the best, that's going to be hard. But even in the US, you're drinking bottled water much of the time. Same thing here. We're drinking bottled water, but we don't have to. It is perfectly safe to drink the tap water, and lots of people do. It is not a problem. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at the link above, buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. If you're looking for advice or assistance in relocation or just someone to give you private tours of the country so you can learn more about it, send us an email, info@relocatenicaragua.com. Remember to like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show. Post on social media. I will see all of you tomorrow.